high school, he's been part of the baseball and basketball teams for the past 3 years. He's on the verge of becoming an Eagle Scout with his review board this coming weekend. His project was actually here on the Augusta Prep campus. He has been involved with his company, Bluff Honey, since 2015, and puts in an appearance with the Chess Club, with AP Live, and involved in beekeeping since 2012. He's been a class officer, student council president, in which role we hear him at assemblies every week. He's joined today by his mother, Helfgott, his brother Jonathan, who was also my advisee, and his sister Alexandria, whom I taught when she was a junior. We also have a special friend, Deborah Sasser, one of his bee mentors. And he currently serves as a beekeeping interpreter at health fairs, and also for Boy Scouts, and occasionally been known to play games on the Xbox. Please help me welcome William to the podium.
I'm sure you all are wondering, what was that sound? Why was it dark in here? Well, I was trying to simulate what it would be like for you to be a bee. Working in complete darkness, next to 30 to 50,000 of your closest bee coworkers. I will first talk about the historic origin of bees, how I got interested in them, and how they've affected me. Historically, the buzz started about 100 million years ago, though the buzz for me started around 9 years ago. I'll get onto that later in the speech. The oldest recorded fossil of a bee dates back 100 million years, and it was discovered in Myanmar in 2006. This fossilized bee is nothing like the honeybee we know today. According to LiveScience.com, this bee preferred eating insects rather than the typical consumption of nectar and pollen. The tradition of keeping bees and harvesting honey dates back around 10,000 years ago. The ancient Egyptians frequently used honey for gifts for the gods, sweeteners, and embalming fluid. In fact, in 1922, archaeologists excavating King Tut's tomb in Egypt discovered honey. It's thought that the honey was used as food for the journey to the afterlife. Despite the passage of 3,343 years since King Tut's burial, the archaeologists tasted the honey and found it to be sweet, and just like the typical honey we consume today. Due to its antibacterial and antifungal properties, honey will not spoil if harvested correctly. The buzz of European honeybees in the newly discovered America started in 1622, after settlers brought over colonies on ships. 230 years after the delivery of European colonies, a man by the name of Lorenzo L. Langstroth created and patented the first movable frame beehive. This invention is still the most commonly used hive around the world today. Only a short 13 years after the creation of the hive, the conventional honey extractor was developed by Franz Helfgott. Langstroth's invention, along with Helfgott's invention, would end up revolutionizing the beekeeping world in that now, the hive would not need to be destroyed to collect honey, and, if harvested gently, the frames could be reused, which translates to more honey production, as less time is being spent on the creation of frames. The production of honey is an extremely important and complex process to us humans, but to bees, it's habitual. First, a worker bee will exit the hive in search of flowers. This search isn't a blind one. In fact, other worker bees will perform a dance called the waggle dance to show other worker bees the distance, position in relation to the sun, and the type of flower to search for. A bee will fly up to 7 miles in search of flowers and can gather and store so much nectar that its weight doubles. After the flowers are located, the pollen and nectar are gathered. The nectar is gathered through the bee's specialized elongated tongue called the proboscis. After the nectar is collected, it is stored in the 2 specialized stomachs of the bees until the worker returns back to the hive. Once the worker returns back to the hive, they will regurgitate the freshly collected nectar into another bee's mouth. Though this process may seem unsanitary, it is an essential step in producing honey. As with each transfer of the nectar, the bees add in specialized enzymes to transform the nectar into honey. Shortly after, the enzyme-enriched nectar is placed into hexagonal cells. At this point, it has a water content of 70%, and the bees will manually fan out 52% of the remaining water, leaving the nectar with a water content of 18%. From here, the nectar is no longer nectar, but it is now honey. Then, a thin layer of wax is added to the newly formed honey to prevent moisture from being added. Since I was a toddler, I've always had an obsession with bees. I even dressed up as a bee for my second Halloween. When my mom offered me the opportunity to take a beekeeping course, I answered yes without hesitation. The first time I saw a beehive was in 2011, after my mom and I took a course through the Georgia 4-H Club. At the end of the 6-week-long course, there was a raffle for various beekeeping items. I won the raffle and chose an English garden hive. I was elated to finally own my own hive, even though I was 8 years old and too weak and too young to maneuver the heavy boxes of the hive. From 2011 to 2014, my mom and I struggled to keep the hive alive. In our many trips out to the beehive, we found ourselves getting stung more times than we could count, with the bee population dwindling. By the end of the season, we were left with no bees, as our hive had swarmed. A year later, we moved across the river into North Augusta, and I asked my mom if we could get another hive. Her response is one that'll always stick with me. Yes, but it'll be completely your responsibility. A few months later, in 2015, I purchased my new colony from Alan Johnson, the owner of Johnson's Bee Supplies, and my mentor with whom I spent hundreds of hours working over the last few years. Fast forward to the spring of 2017, when I could have been standing around in the 8th grade hallway, chatting with my friends before the start of the school day, I ran over to the library, quickly logged onto the computer, and purchased a honey extract that I had been eyeing for months. The rest of the school day was a blur as I daydreamed about using the spinner. I used it later that summer to harvest my honey for the first time. I was both shocked and thrilled by how much honey I was able to harvest. After many trips back and forth between the hive and the spinner, I realized just how much honey I had on my hands. From here, I made a great realization. There was no way that my family could eat all of this honey, and it was from this dilemma that Bluff Honey was born. I hopped on my bike and decided to go door to door in my neighborhood, selling my honey to my neighbors. I named the honey Bluff Honey. I took inspiration from the street that I live on, Bluff Road. After setting out on my bike, I had sold out all the honey within 30 minutes. And when I returned home, my mom confided in me that she expected me to return upset that no one had bought it. My neighbors and neighborhood played such a key role in my initial foray into the world of honey sales that I decided to keep the name of my company, Bluff Honey. Later that year, in the winter of 2017, I applied for a scholarship through the Aiken County Beekeepers Association, which would provide a beehive and coursework to become a certified beekeeper. After weeks of checking the mailbox to find out the results of the scholarship competition, I was elated to finally find out that I had been chosen. I received the hive and passed the course to become a certified beekeeper. However, the biggest impact from this scholarship was the connections I made within the beekeeping community. Remember the name Alan Johnson? Shortly after the course ended, he asked me if I would be willing to work out on his bee farm that summer. Many early mornings, bee stings, hives assembled, checked, and inspected later, my knowledge of bees and beekeeping increased tremendously. I now had the knowledge required to properly keep bees. And after a full year after my first honey selling experience in my neighborhood, I took a leap of faith and began the journey of selling my honey in stores in the CSRA. My first attempt was the Purple Hole in North Augusta. I will never forget the mixture of excitement and nerves as I walked into the store. After explaining my background, the honey harvesting process, and the value of local honey, the store owner agreed to sell it. I will forever be grateful for him taking a chance on me and my product, as it was this interaction that motivated me to reach out to other stores in the area. Not long after, the Augusta Chronicle published an article on me and Bluff Honey, and the tables quickly turned. Now, stores and individuals were reaching out to me asking to purchase honey. Fast forward to today, Bluff Honey's products are in 21 stores across the CSRA. I participated in dozens of pop-up shows and have a strong community support online. Since the start of the pandemic, I began receiving many calls from aspiring beekeepers, looking for advice, asking questions, and seeking guidance. Bluff Honey has since adapted, adding a new branch, mentoring novice beekeepers. I'm the recipient of many hours in advising, and I would not be the beekeeper I am today if it weren't for people like Alan Johnson or Deborah Sasser, who is my go-to whenever I have any beekeeping-related question. As of now, I teach 8 adults and 1 teenager about beekeeping and help manage over 35 hives. Through teaching, I'm able to give back to the same hobby and same creatures that have exposed me to so much. When I first started getting into bees, I didn't know how much of an impact tiny little insects would have on my life and just how much they teach me about myself. Bluff Honey has been successful, but there have been just as many challenges and failures along the way. A few years ago, when I was a novice beekeeper, I had returned from a trip overseas, and I decided to check the bees early that morning. Because I was so unfamiliar with bees, I didn't use any smoke or wear a second pair of socks. Instead, I opted for a black pair of socks, which I quickly came to learn were the bees' least favorite color. Shortly into the hive check, I got stung 4 times. I panicked and jumped into our pool with boots, jeans, and a full cotton suit on. It was difficult to rise to the top of the pool with all the extra weight on, and honestly, I was afraid that I might drown. Later that day, rain was in the forecast and I had left the hive uncovered. If it rains on an open hive, there was a great possibility it won't survive. Because I had just gotten stung so much, I refused to suit back up and check on the bees. After a quarrel with my mom, begging her to not make me go back there, she reminded me of the quote, "The bees were completely my responsibility," and because of this, I quickly ran over and covered the hive. Another setback was when one of the first markets that I asked to sell my honey said no. They claimed their honey was superior and had absolutely no interest in selling my honey. Lastly, the most uncomfortable I've been around bees was when my boss, Alan Johnson, located a swarm about 6 feet off of the ground on a tree limb. I was instructed to hold a box over my head and don't drop it. For the next 30 seconds, it felt like it was raining. No, it wasn't actually rain. Those were bees pouring all on me and down my suit. When I say I was surprised at how much bees could teach me, this is what I meant. Even though I was unsuccessful at first with getting my honey into stores, the denial of not being in the small farmer's market only fueled me to have my honey in stores. Secondly, I was extremely uncomfortable with the thought of going back into the hive that almost caused me to drown a few hours before. But it was necessary, and the resilience strengthened me. Lastly, I've never felt more uncomfortable than when it was raining bees. This too allowed for growth, as now there's not much that can faze me with being scared of bees. There are many things that bees have taught me, but 2 of the most important and self-applicable ones are: 1, the only time you're growing is when you're uncomfortable. And 2, if you feel like stopping, remember why you started. I'm grateful to my customers, my mentors, and my family for supporting me in my business endeavors. But I owe the greatest thanks to the woman who got me started on my beekeeping journey, my mom. The one who's held the vision for me since the very beginning and always encouraged me to persevere regardless of the circumstances. And finally, I want to give thanks to those little yellow and black insects who've let me share their magic with the Bluff Honey community and taught me so much about patience, business, and myself. Thank you.
Thank you, William, for sharing your story with us. It's truly a story of growth and perseverance. And thank you to all the family who have supported him on this journey.